I just want to welcome you to part 2 of our series on the AC Cobra or Shelby Cobra with JB Donaldson. So today we're going to talk about mechanicals in the engine. Welcome along. All right, JB, there's of course a lot of either lack of information or even misinformation because Cobra has been blessed with being copied an awful lot. And
that's very true.
A lot of cars are out there that either pretend or, even claim to be original cars, and yet they're not original and they're different. And a lot of people wouldn't even know what to look for, how they really came out of the factory correctly.
Right.
And I think it'd be fun since you have a very correct original car here. For the most part.
Right.
Let's talk about the mechanicals and the engine on this car and just kind of show people things that they often don't really see and explain what we have here.
Well, some of the best reproductions have spent a great deal of time and money in trying to recreate history. There's only one way you can be in history, and that's have the car built by the original factory in period, which ended in the late 60s. So a car was built subsequent to that. I'm not going to judge those cars because there are so many different variants that really you can't do that honestly. I think that it's a tribute basically to the original because people who don't have the kind of wherewithal it takes to buy a car now they missed the window, and so now they're going to do the very best next thing they think, and that is buy a car that's a recreation. And there are good ones and there are bad ones and there are really good ones and really bad ones. So to try and comment all that together would be unfair to them.
Sure.
The same people that made some of the original bodies are still in that business. The aluminum bodies, all Cobras were aluminum and fiberglass.
Okay.
A lot of people don't understand that and do not know the history of the Cobras. But the Cobras came out of AC cars in Thames Ditton, England, as the AC, and the AC was a very similar body style. We talked about that a little bit,
right?
And it was a harkening back to probably the very first cars that demonstrated that kind of design were the early Ferraris. So you go back way back into the 50s, which is 10 or 15 years before this car shows up. So, but AC cars, like a lot of sports car people, used the model of Ferrari because it was a successful model.
Sure.
And said, okay, we'll make our cars look like Ferrari, and so that's why the AC cars look like Ferraris, and that's why the Cobras ended up looking like Ferraris.
Okay.
And all the Shelby guys are going to be upset with me, but that's too bad. If you don't, all you got to do is read your history.
Sure.
And understand that they were influenced by two things: a masterful builder of race cars and aerodynamics. And aerodynamics is something everybody came to as the cars went faster and faster. They realized that the aerodynamics was what was holding them down. You could have all the horsepower in the world, but the car would not push through that magic wall of the air at 100 plus miles an hour, sometimes 200 miles an hour. You were not going to go any faster, and that was all race cars had to abide by those rules. So the mechanical part of it was also very important. In other words, if you could break through that barrier of 200 miles an hour, which is what had to be done in order to challenge the Ferraris, really challenge them, you had to be able to go over 200 at Mulsanne in the annual race, which was the test of all cars, Le Mans. And if you couldn't go over 200 miles an hour in this general classification, you really couldn't win. And that's what the Cobras proved in their first outing. But they had reliability problems. They couldn't last 24 hours. So they had to go back home and go to work on that. And if you study the history of it and read Mike Schoen's book, little plug there, you'll see how this whole thing evolved. But it's fascinating because Ford took the position, we're in it for the long haul. We're not just going to run out for a couple of years and go up against this incredible juggernaut of Ferrari and expect to win. They were not successful in the beginning. They rededicated themselves to winning, and so they had to figure out how to make these cars last. Right. And that's where the 289 came along. The 289 was a station wagon motor, essentially. That's the way Ford looked at it. It was an experimental motor. Shelby caught wind of it coming down the production, and he said, "Oh, that would be a good engine for my car." And he got one of the very early versions of it, and the rest is history. So that car triumphed for many, many years. It's still winning. It was a very light engine, made a lot of horsepower. Okay. And this most important characteristic was that it was well made and it would last.
Okay, so it had a lot of durability built in.
A lot of durability and a lot of things that the other engines, which were very exotic, but just could not last, going 200 miles an hour for 24 hours is a huge challenge to any motor.
Sure.
So the 289s proved to be up to it. And what we have here is this, of course, is one of the very last Cobras that Shelby built. This is 2589, which is very close. 2583 and 2589 was the last car that he built.
Okay.
Okay. So
near the end of the run here.
It is very, very close to the end. And what's good about that is that it has all the updates.
Sure. Okay.
Okay. The earlier cars had 260s.
That's 260 cubic inches.
That's correct. And that was an earlier version of the 289. Okay. But it was a smaller engine and less capable. They also had worm and sector, which was a holdover from the 50s. And to be successful, when they started racing the Cobras, they realized the worm and sector steering was not going to get it done, that they had to go to the next level, which was rack and pinion. Okay. And this car has rack and pinion. So
let's have a look here.
It has all of the updates that it's a very simple system. It's still in use to this day in hot rods and that sort of thing, because it is so simple and so effective and inexpensive.
I'm seeing the
it's a very, very simple set of gears that when you turn the steering wheel, it turns the car.
You have out of this box here, you have the steering or column comes out to a U-joint.
Exactly. Because of the angle, it has to be.
It's got to turn a sharp angle down
exactly, and you see that a lot in hot rods. Really, the Cobra is a hot rod in every sense. And you take a car that used to have a little engine and put a big engine in it. You got all kinds of things that are updates to an early car. So in a very real sense, it really is a 60s hot rod.
Yeah.
And that
it's got one Travers spring in the front.
Right, which is ancient technology.
Yeah.
Probably going back to primeval times.
But I guess it saves weight and space.
It is an effective, simple system. Mercifully, the front suspension being simple and being well thought out, it was more functional in a race car. Remember that they have incredibly small budgets.
Yeah.
They could not just redesign the whole car in the middle of a race season. They had to get this thing out on the track, run it, sophisticate it, fix the things that were not working and breaking, and get back in it because they were on a very thin amount of money to work on in a very short period of time. So they had to get out there and prove themselves. Ford was not interested in a car that couldn't win. And so when they came along and said, we'll back you, but with one condition, and that is you got to win.
Okay.
And I don't mean win a little or even a medium amount. You got to win all the time and everywhere. Otherwise, why are we giving you all this money?
Sure.
And so, and it was a reasonable request, and Ford himself got involved. If you follow the history and if you saw the movie, you see that he said, look, I'm tired of all you guys messing around with politics. I want to beat Ferrari.
Yeah.
And somebody's going to have to be put in charge of that. And Shelby stepped forward and said, I will do it, but you got to give me the right to pick the drivers and do all the rest of the work. One man leading a small group is always going to be more adept at what they're doing than a committee.
Sure.
And so that's what happened, and that's why they were so successful.
Yeah.
So
so now looking at this engine some more.
Yes.
It looks like you have a high-rise manifold, intake manifold.
Well, what we have, and of course, there really is, unfortunately, there's not enough room under the hood unless you put a scoop on here, which cars did.
Yeah.
In this particular car, we have what was an extremely rare option, which is the 3.2 setup that was available, but almost no cars took advantage of.
Wow. So most had a 4-barrel single carburetor.
Almost
is that
all,
right?
oh yeah, probably 95 or 98% of them had 4 barrels.
Okay.
This was a legal
This is a factory
modification that you could have if you knew to ask for it.
Okay.
You also had to think it was viable. Don Roberts, who when I got this, is a good friend. He was the most successful Cobra driver ever, because of course he drove Cobras a lot longer than even Shelby did. But he told me that if I converted this to 3.2s, I was going to really regret it. And so with that warning, I went to a very talented induction guy, Bob Ream, and I said, Bob, this thing's got to work. I mean, looks is one thing, but if the thing falls on its face every time you hit the throttle, that's not going to go down well.
Right.
Because I'm going to have to answer to Don Roberts, who's going to laugh uncontrollably at
Right.
me and say, I told you, I told you. So Bob Ream was able to make this thing, by virtue of its fundamental design and his great talent, to be functional all through the RPM range. So that was.
So is he responsible for the intake manifold?
Absolutely, yeah. Okay. He built this entire system. It took us, I believe, I think it was 5 or 6 years to finally get the whole thing built and put together and find all of the incredibly rare parts that were necessary, because I want it to be dead exactly original. And that's every part you see is what came from Ford Motor Company.
Wow.
You could buy this in a kit.
Okay.
You could put it on a Mustang, you could put it on a Cobra, you could put it on any 289 engine. If you notice, it really fills everything up.
Sure does.
Where a 4-barrel would give you a lot more room, and this is very tricky, getting all of these linkages and all these
yeah, and I'm
fuel
going to come
logs
around.
and
People are going to want to see the other side of this.
Yep.
So let me walk around here so we can see both angles here, because there's a lot of business going on over here.
Yeah, it's quite a bit of complexity.
So I'm seeing looks like a fuel rail here.
Exactly.
That connects.
Yeah, that's how you
hoses to the carbs.
Well, because if these were individual, then there would be a difference. Obviously, if a fuel line's going this distance, and then another one's going this distance, and one's going way down here, you're going to have a disparity in the fuel.
Okay, so this equalizes the fuel pressure.
Exactly. All the fuel goes into the fuel log. It's dispensed equally into the 3 carburetors.
Gotcha.
Now they're not used equally, but that fuel pressure has to be available so that when it comes online, it doesn't. There's no gap in the ability to produce the fuel it needs. So that's one of the secrets to one of these, is that each one of these is small, and so what you get is an incremental change. You don't get a massive change like you would with 2 4-barrels, where the second 4-barrel jumps on top of what's going on and causes this massive injection of fuel. You don't want that. What you want is a smooth, kind of rhythmic delivery of the fuel to the engine as the RPM requires it, and that's what this car does in spades.
Right.
It never stumbles. You never hear a hiccup or a drop in RPM. It just absolutely smooth as glass up through up to 100 and over 100 miles an hour.
All right. Now I see it is connected to an electric fuel pump on the side there.
That's correct. Yeah.
Is that original also?
No, that's not correct, because the original fuel pumps are made with material that is affected by the fuel that's available.
Okay.
So that was not a possibility. You can put a car in that condition. It's original, but no, it's not drivable any longer.
Yeah. So you still want to be able to drive this thing?
I drive it a lot, and I don't want to have to putz with it. All I do is drain what little gas is left in it each year. Okay. Get rid of the gas because it has alcohol in it. The alcohol putrefies, and so it doesn't work. I mean, it has no octane or very little, so I got to drain that. And that electric fuel pump facilitates that. I can just put a can below the car and pump all the bad fuel out of it in a matter of minutes, and then put new fuel in it.
So just to finish up here, this is a high compression, I guess, 289. Is it?
These engines were rated at 306 from the factory.
Okay.
A typical 289 would have been rated about 275.
Okay.
Somewhere in that neighborhood. It's still a very powerful engine, regardless. These are probably one of the most amazing engines in terms of potential. Don Roberts, when he finally finished building his last 289, we went to a drag race at Bob Bondurant's place, and he was actually able to go in the late 10s in a quarter of a mile with his car, and it was set up with road race gears, so they were not really designed for drag racing. his car had to be making close to 500 horsepower.
Wow. Okay.
One of the reasons he was so successful, but it was reliable horsepower.
Mm-hmm.
There were cars that had much more horsepower, but they were on the ragged edge of blowing up. So
Right.
in many races, in fact, toward the end, when his car won the big meeting of the Cobras that happened, the 50-year anniversary,
Mm-hmm.
it was Don Roberts' little 289 that ended up winning that race.
Wow.
Of all the Cobras on the planet.
Yeah, and you think about, I'm just imagining how many drag racing cars would last a 24-hour race at high throttle.
Of course they wouldn't. They were not designed to do that.
No,
but
that's a
Don
different
had to
design.
survive for hours and hours and hours.
Yeah.
And he would just drive right by, especially the factory Corvettes.
Yep.
Because they were heavier and couldn't brake in the corners.
Mm-hmm.
And his car was made to live.
Now, just looking under the hood a little more, since that's what we're featuring today.
Right.
I'm noticing you have a battery stowed way down low.
Yeah, that's the original location in a performance car. The last place you want the battery is up at mid-range or up high, because now your center of gravity is being affected. So putting the battery, which is very heavy, down low,
Mm-hmm.
is really a function of performance,
Right.
Not so much accessibility. It's very difficult to get to the battery, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, it's down deep in
You
there.
can get it out of there, but there's some wrestling and tossing and some colorful language involved.
And is this a jack, I guess, down in there too?
Well, this is the right here. Are you looking at this?
Well,
This
I'm
is
looking at two things, I guess.
okay. No, this is the heat. This allows fresh air to go into the foot box.
Oh, I couldn't tell what that was.
Right.
Okay.
The fresh air is picked up in front of the car inside this panel,
Okay.
and then it's ushered into here.
So that's like a blower motor I'm looking
Exactly. The air is blown into the in-car, because these cars, you got to remember that this is almost a mid-engine car. So the engine is right there. In fact, when you're driving this in the summer, you can probably roast a hot dog on your toes. Your feet, the foot box here, where your feet are,
Yeah.
and the clutch pedal and the brake pedal, you're way forward.
You're halfway into the block.
Right.
And
So
also, I can tell where this traverse spring is pretty much center line of the axle.
Exactly.
And the whole engine's behind it.
Exactly. So what that tells you is that's another reason they were so successful.
Yeah.
Because if you put a much heavier engine, the 289 is much heavier than the 6-cylinder this car was originally built to take.
Okay, right.
So you got to move it backwards to get that balance that's going to happen when you put more weight in there.
Yep.
Then that center of gravity has to be moved backwards. So you can see how they did it. They pushed the engine clear back here in the foot box, and your feet is actually in front of about the middle of the engine.
That's wild.
It's one of the reasons the 427 struggled so badly, because they put yet another 200 pounds,
right,
and the car struggled.
And it's a wider block. I just wondered, did they have to change?
Yeah, they made a number of changes.
The
The car was never successful. It would win in a class of stock Corvettes or something, but in reality, it was never very much of a race car. And they struggled to make it.
It had to be very front heavy compared.
It was, and what happened was the horsepower increase did not offset the handling decrease.
Ah, right.
And the braking problem now became a problem, because now you need massive brakes. The engine weighs 200 or 300 pounds more than the 289.
Right.
So it had so many things wrong.
And it's such a light car. The 300 pounds is a big.
It's a huge deal. It's one of the reasons the Cobras were successful. Okay. They didn't have all that much horsepower, but they were so light that they could go way into the corners before they had to brake, and they'd go by the Ferraris and the Corvettes and the Jaguars, because they were all heavier, and so they had to brake sooner, and so the Cobras would pass them in the corners.
Okay. Now, you mentioned that the Cobras were both fiberglass and aluminum.
There was a large portion of the car was built out of fiberglass.
Now, I'm looking we happen to be under the hood, and I see a tubular frame.
Right.
And what is the material attached to that frame? What are we looking at here?
Oh, this is just a lightweight. The hood probably only weighs about 15 pounds or something.
Is it aluminum or fiberglass?
It's aluminum.
Okay.
And you can see how there's no internal structure here.
No.
If you look at the car, it's actually a cartoon of a car. That's the only way I can explain it.
Okay.
The doors weigh 6 pounds.
Right.
Now you grab any car on the planet and you say, how much does the door weigh? It's going to weigh 40 or 50 pounds.
Right.
This weighs 6 pounds. Okay?
Oh my goodness.
The dash weighs 1.5 pounds.
Right.
Okay, it's one little thin piece of aluminum covered with leather, so it looks like a normal dash, but in reality, there's nothing there.
Yeah. So what parts can you just, so we can just get a general idea, what parts are, just generally speaking, aluminum and what's fiberglass on this car?
Well, you got to look at your car without the carpet in it, and you start seeing all this fiberglass.
Okay.
Shelby later said, if I could have made them out of fiberglass, I would have made them out of fiberglass in the first place.
Okay.
Because aluminum is so problematic.
Mhm.
I mean, it takes incredible craftsmanship. It's very expensive to do, long-winded, and so it puts you at a disadvantage.
Okay.
Remember how aluminum cars came along? They came along because you wanted to build 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, and the Daytona Coupes were built that way.
Okay.
They were just banged on stumps by Italian guys with a lot of talent, and they say, here's your Daytona Coupe.
Right.
And 3 weeks later, well, you can't do that in a production car. So
Right.
these were trying to live in both worlds. And as soon as he got to the point where he can make them out of fiberglass, he started making them out of fiberglass. In fact, I made some of his fiberglass cars for him. And he didn't have no use for aluminum. But it was necessary, and the AC cars were already aluminum, so he had to kind of deal with that.
Kind of came with the package.
It came with the package, and it was too late to change them around. But
okay.
the trunk is all fiberglass. This tunnel is fiberglass. The foot, if you take the car apart, you see all these fiberglass components.
Okay.
And that was true in the very beginning.
Now, but the rear quarters, that's all aluminum?
The rest of the body is all aluminum.
Okay.
Okay.
No.
So because it's still a very small group of cars, I mean, they only ever built less than 1,000 Cobras.
Yeah.
And so in the bigger picture, that was a very small production.
Mm-hmm.
So they really, in order to completely go to fiberglass, they would have needed many more cars. And AC Cars wasn't set up to do that. They were already building a lot of the components out of fiberglass because it made economic sense.
Sure.
But those are the things you don't see. And the underneath this car, if you see the diagram of the AC cars, you see very clearly how much fiberglass is in it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, now, okay, just to finish up on the mechanicals, what kind of rear axle is living in?
Well, Shelby was famous for stealing things.
Yeah. Okay.
He would say, I'm only going to build 600 or 800 cars.
Right.
See, to homologate a car for racing, the minimum was, I believe, 500 cars.
Okay.
Now, Shelby took it literally, and Ford made him do it. But over on the Ferrari side, Ferrari would print 500 body numbers, and build 6 cars. So of course he had an advantage.
Yeah.
All right. And everybody knows this. I'm not making this up.
Right.
So, but Shelby had, the people at Ford overlooking him, and he felt like if he was to try and pull something like Ferrari was doing, that they would throw him out. So he said, no, we're going to play the game the right way. We're going to make 500 cars. That was the if you wanted to be in a production class at Le Mans, you had to build 500 cars. Well, they never built, I don't know if they ever built 500 Ferraris of any description.
Right.
They built 10 or 12, and so they were getting away with a lot of shenanigans, mostly because nobody wanted to challenge him.
Right.
But you had to build 500 cars. So when he got to 500, he said, I'm done. I don't care. And I think they wound up building 600 or 700. That's why there's so few of them. But in the big picture, if you look at the number of Ferraris that are existent and the number of Cobras that are existent, there's a lot more Cobras than there are Ferraris. So, the fact that they're extremely valuable is interesting to me personally, because there's so many of them out there. Yeah. But that's because of their popularity and the fact that they were able to beat Ferrari in 1965.
So it's a long answer that I haven't quite got yet, is the rear axle.
The rear axle comes pretty much intact from Jaguar.
Oh, it's a Jag?
Yeah, it's a Jaguar.
Really?
A variation of it. Yeah.
Interesting.
And of course, we have some really good stories about the origins of some of these parts. They stole things from Austin Healey's. The taillights came from another British car. The bumperettes come from another car. My favorite story about him stealing things was the turn signals. Okay. Because they got to the turn signals, and of course the laws are different in the U.S. than they are in England. So he had to make a really quick adjustment. Yeah. So somebody at Shelby said, where are we going to get a turn signal? We got to have a turn signal. It's part of the legal requirements.
It has to be very compact for a tight space.
It has to be compact, and it has to fit into the context of what we're already doing.
Right.
So somebody said, you know what, that steering column looks a lot like a Volkswagen. And everybody said, shh, we won't tell anybody.
No way.
If you take that turn signal off, it's stamped VW right on it.
No
And that
kidding.
just is one of many
That's a
places that he was.
Volkswagen turn signal start.
This I believe comes off of a Ford Falcon or something. I'm not,
What were you pointing at just now?
I was pointing at the
the clock?
The clock.
Okay.
Yeah. Now the radio came out of an Econoline van, as near as I can tell.
Okay.
And those are rare, you know.
Right.
But they came right out of an Econoline van. It wasn't exactly rare.
Right.
And so the gauges are a mishmash of things. Some of them
Yep.
Stuart Warner, some of them, depending on what year,
Yeah.
they would rob stuff from this car and that car
Interesting.
to get what they needed to have.
Huh.
This is clearly out of a Mustang. All right.
Okay.
Any Mustang guys knows that all this is a shifter that's been hacked off and re-welded.
No
Look
kidding.
at the shift knob. Look at the lockout. It's clearly a
Interesting.
Mustang.
Yeah, it's just a short.
And the automatics that this car, one of the 12 original automatic cars originally. If you look at the automatic, it's just complete auto theft right out of a Mustang. Okay. They didn't even bother to change anything.
They didn't pretend any otherwise.
No, they didn't need to. Who cared?
Yeah.
They were building a car to race.
Right.
And these cars supported the program, but they were never really
Yeah,
they're
that's
never
all
really
they
concerned
wanted.
about the street cars.
That is really fascinating.
Yep.
So
A lot of things that were taken from other cars because it was just more convenient. The engine is another obvious. It's out of a
I mean,
station
289s
wagon.
were in everything Ford.
Sure,
made,
yeah,
just about.
Mustangs, all kinds of cars.
The Fairlane, the
Fairlane
Galaxy, whatever.
And, had the same engine as a matter of fact.
Sure.
Fairlanes had a limited number of coded 206 horsepower 289s.
Okay.
306,
And
excuse me.
Obviously, the Mustangs
this
did.
Alternator come out of I believe a 66 Galaxy.
Okay.
All right.
gonna
These
ask you
are
about
Galaxy issue.
Okay.
All right. A little bit of a modification on the bracketry and that sort of thing, but you're looking at 63 and 4 Galaxy. That's exactly what you see. So
Interesting.
he was robbing things from everywhere.
Yeah, whatever was parts available already.
This car has a very rare survivor, and this is the Oiler, which is kind of a throwback to the 50s. That probably came out of an Austin Healey or an MG. Well, this is actually how you oil you have the little Zerk fittings.
Okay. So for lubing and greasing.
Exactly.
Okay,
that's what
gotcha.
that's for. Okay. And those are almost always missing. This car mercifully came with it. Wow. And so we've preserved it. So this car had just about everything that it's supposed to have, and the things that we updated, we tried to use NOS parts where they were available. I think even the plug wires, if you look at them closely, these are Newell stock.
Cool.
Okay. And has a number of those kinds of things on it. The fuel pump is Newell stock. Trying to remember, it's been a lot of years. This system right here is what sends a message to the fan on the radiator that, hey, we're getting hot. We need to turn the fan on. So if you're going at low speed and the air is not moving through the radiator.
Is that a mechanical switch or an electric?
It is. It actually is. There's a little thermal switch inside of this thing.
Okay.
And these are still available. I believe they still make them and use them on Jaguars and that sort of thing. But it really sends a message to the fan that, hey, we're getting hot here. We need some fan. And this thing will turn on. A car, when these are not functioning because as soon as you turn the car on, this goes on. That means it's not functioning.
So it defaults on if
exactly.
It's not working. Okay.
And because this was a rare automatic car, it also has the rarest of all additions. It has a tranny cooler. Okay.
Right.
Now you don't need a tranny cooler if you have a stick shift.
Right.
So I have a guy I know who does authentic such things. Took 1 million pictures of that thing because it's probably one of the very few left on planet Earth.
Interesting.
Only 12 cars built with automatics.
Wow.
At the very, very end. You could buy one on order if you wanted to pay more, but most people didn't want an automatic.
Right.
The reason they came along with the automatics is because they were hard getting rid of them. They were having a very
make it easy to drive.
Sure. At the end of the run, every car has a difficult time being sold.
Yep.
And so they threw the automatics in there. And Carroll Shelby's car was an automatic. For those of you who are going poo-poo, Carroll Shelby drove an automatic. So there you go. Okay. And
Very good.
His car is equipped to this day.
Well, JB, thank you. It's a fascinating tour here.
Yeah.
of some of these mechanicals here on this car.
Yep.
And everybody stay tuned for the next episode where we, I think we're going to get this thing fired up and moving.
Yep.
We'll wait for that.
Looking forward to it.
Okay, thanks.